Some conversations don't begin with words. They begin with weight. The kind you feel when something you were taught to trust begins to strain under the reality of the people you love. When moving anything feels risky because you're not sure what might collapse if you do. In this episode, I'm joined by Dr. David P. Gushee, a longtime Christian ethicist and author whose work helped shape the foundation of my faith and later gave me language for one of its most important renovations. If you've ever felt caught between loyalty to your faith and loyalty to an LGBTQ plus someone you love, or wondered whether changing your mind means losing yourself, this conversation is for you. It's a story of moving from foundation to renovation, of changing our mind when love leads the rebuild. I'm Jeff Click, and this is Love Without Asterisks. Here is my conversation with Dr. Gushee.
Well, Dr. Gushee, what an absolute pleasure it is to be here in this conversation with you today. This is a real full circle moment for me in a lot of ways. So thank you for taking the time to join me today here on Love Without Asterisks.
Thank you for the invitation, Jeff. Great to be with you.
Of course. So I'm a retired home builder. I spent about 25 years in the construction industry doing design and construction, as a general contractor. And so I use design and construction language somewhat as a metaphor in these discussions. And so you were a part of that because you're a part of the early story of my wife and my, what I call renovation.
That's really meaningful, Jeff. And I hope during this conversation, you'll say more about that. I don't think I know the details. I know we had a little bit of email exchange.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, happy to. So, and of course, if you want to follow up with any questions as we discuss, I'm happy to share that as well. But so I went back to Changing Our Mind, which is really the first book of yours that comes into the story here for me. I went back and went through it for a third time, kind of in preparation for this episode. And there was a quote that really stuck out to me that I think illustrates, or at least just dials right into the pivot point or to the where we stand with the subject matter of my podcast. And that quote is that you said there's a difference between being stubbornly stuck and simply not knowing the next faithful step forward. I think that's at the epicenter of what I'm trying to spend some time in discussion with in this podcast. So, I wonder, how many parents and pastors and communities on this issue, on the LGBTQ plus issue, how many of them are actually resisting change versus, say, being frozen from lack of clear vision on what a next step looks like?
It's definitely some of each. There are some who are stubbornly stuck and they're never going to move. Kind of boxed in by their theological categories, by their traditions, by their job self-interest, pastors who can't say something because it would destroy their career. But there are lots of others who don't know the next faithful step forward. They can't quite see a path. I think maybe what my book helped to do for some people was to help people see a path.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
True for me, for sure. True for me.
Yeah.
So, and it's, as I've spent time learning more, doing more work, becoming more well-versed in kind of navigating being the parent of an LGBTQ plus child, I've come to realize that, it's kind of important to consider that distinction. I've talked some about the experience we had with kind of, being in deeply embedded within evangelical conservative circles here in Oklahoma City and raising our children there, even in a homeschool environment to some extent for part of that time. But I've come to realize that, not everyone has the language necessarily to support a parent of an LGBTQ child.
That's definitely the case for parents. Parents don't have multiple generations of children usually, right? I mean, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 kids, and you never did it before, and you're learning it as you go along. I think it's a little less excusable for pastors because if it's the year 2025 and pastors who are paying any kind of attention to the culture or to their own flocks must run into this story unless they're so oblivious or so unsafe that nobody wants to talk to them. Um, but I do think churches have a responsibility and pastors have a responsibility to have a plan, to have language, to have steps forward, to have support for families, for parents, for kids. Um, and that process is happening. I mean, I think that many pastors are being resourced to do better now.
And that's
Yeah,
that's encouraging news and good news. And
yeah.
I'm sure your book had a lot to do with that. Um,
It
because
was
I know
one. I mean, there were others,
yeah,
but it was also written in a way I was trying to be able to speak to just regular people with the book. You know.
mm, I felt that too. I did. Even though, I am a product of Southern Baptist culture. Grew up, in the church twice on Sunday, once on Wednesday, as they say.
Yep.
Went to a private Baptist university. So a lot of the themes, messages, positions certainly run deep within, as I call, the blueprint of the design that we moved forward with our own family. My wife and I, as we got married, uh, it made sense for us, having been raised in this environment, that's of course where we're going to plug in as well. And
Hmm.
um, it was at a time just when things started to rapidly change, and we had put our daughter into a situation that we weren't aware of its ramifications until it was almost too late, unfortunately.
Mm,
Um, and like many parents, or anyone who, as I say, has an LGBTQ plus someone that they're looking to support and to love better, for us and for me, the problem was is that, in wrestling through accepting this news of our daughter, um, there was just this big load bearing wall in the way.
mm,
And that was what I call sort of the whole soup of faith
yeah.
and religion and just Christianity in general, what the Bible says, what we're taught.
Yeah.
Um, and so that load, learning how to address that load bearing wall, and what may come crashing down should that load bearing wall be
Mm.
removed. That's a real question that people contend with in this, as you well know.
Let me ask you a builder question.
Hmm.
If you're doing a renovation and you conclude that you have to or you want to take out a load bearing wall, and that means you have to replace it with a different load bearing wall, right?
You have to shore it up somehow. That support has to be addressed, and yeah,
Um, and when you're if let's say you're removing an entire load bearing wall, do you put in the new wall first?
it's often braced off to the sides, so you're propping up whatever you're removing in between, and
That's
then
so
you have to somehow, you know, you have to reincorporate some way to restore the the load that wall was bearing, even though the wall itself may look differently afterwards.
I just think that's a great image. My experience is conservative Christianity put a lot. I mean, you might say everything was understood to be foundational, everything. Um, so that how many times do I hear somebody say, if I rethink LGBTQ issues, my entire faith will collapse. Um, because it went something like this. That's clearly in the Bible to reject such people or such behavior. If I reject that, I'm rejecting the Bible. But the Bible is inerrant or infallible and is the rule of faith. So therefore, if I am not willing to be obedient on this unhappy teaching, then I'm rejecting Scripture, which means I'm rejecting the God who inspired Scripture, which means I'm being rebellious, which means I'm no longer a believer, or something like that. And and it just and that's the load bearing wall. It's bearing a lot of weight, and so what I think I tried to do was to say, um, you can still keep a robust commitment to Scripture, a deep commitment to Jesus, uh, a faith that is the center of your life, and disentangle that from a way of interpreting those verses that is destructive. Um, yeah.
I'm glad you bring this up, because that was in my list of things I wanted to discuss with you, which is often in this process. the term deconstruction obviously comes to mind because that's what happens with a lot of people.
Yeah.
To carry forth that kind of renovation image, you know, my whole profession, my whole career was built usually building brand new. And there's this kind of running understanding that hey, when the new home market is down, people will often renovate their house. So it's smart for a builder to also know how to renovate and to go in to
Mm-hmm.
do remodels. And so early in my career, I was like, okay, well, if that's true, then let's buy a house and let's renovate it and kind of learn without anybody necessarily living there, which
Mm-hmm.
is a whole nother animal. But um, I was very design centric. So I was always about kind of how is this going to look? The thing about renovation, though, is that, as we budgeted so much to make this place look better. But what I found is as we got into making it look better, we would open up certain parts to say, open up a wall and realize, oh, wait a second, there's something in here I've got to address. Something, over time has gotten wrong, or something got in here that has caused damage. And
Yeah.
then when you start to look there, then you realize, oh, wait a second. Now I see something else over here, and I can't let that slide. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So from a deconstruction standpoint, um, for me, I think where I'm at is still in the process you described, which is sorting out. Okay, we've got the LGBTQ topic here that obviously is a factor in ways similar to other issues, but somehow yet it's different. And how do I separate this without having other implications on my faith or other implications on how I view scripture and its authority, when over here I've kind of spent this time trying to debunk what I was taught?
Right. Right. In the inclusive academic community and church community, I see a spectrum of, you might say, the most conservative people. A good example of this is Matthew Vines, who wrote God and the Gay Christian. He's a friend of mine. My sense of Matthew is he is still essentially a conservative evangelical Christian who has a very high theology of Scripture. He's just trying to change the interpretation of a handful of verses. But otherwise, he's essentially an evangelical Christian, and that hasn't changed. That has not been deconstructed for him.
Right.
Um,
And I think that comes through in his book.
yeah,
It's yeah.
yeah. Whereas, you read other people, and it's probably a majority actually, Jeff. They they do find that rethinking the LGBT question does raise some somewhat deeper questions about what Scripture is and how to read it. Um, for example, the relative authority of Old Testament law over against, say, the inclusive ministry of Jesus.
Mhm.
So if you start making moves like that, then your Bible has a little more texture to it. Some parts of it, at least implicitly, carry more authority than other parts do. When in doubt, follow the way of Jesus. And if you have a passage in Leviticus that's problematic, you don't let that stand in the way of loving your child or following Jesus in the direction of love, right? Um, I think a lot of evangelicals have a flat Bible, at least in theory, in which, for example, the holy war passages of Joshua carry the same authority as Jesus saying, love your enemy. And I think that needs to be deconstructed because I think that Bible is too flat. And that's not actually the best tradition of Christianity. The best tradition of Christianity has always centered Jesus and made Jesus the criterion by which the Bible is interpreted. Um, anyway, back to my example. Some people on the other side of this um, revelation that the Bible is easily read to hurt LGBTQ people end up diminishing the authority of the Bible, emphasizing other sources of authority, taking a more critical posture towards the Bible overall, maybe taking a very critical posture towards the church. The church is that primary institution that creates harm. And so therefore I'm not sure I want to do church anymore. We
Mhm.
see that a lot on the other side.
Yeah.
Um, in the ex-evangelical movement, there was an empty the pews campaign in around 2019. Don't go to church; it's where people get hurt, right? So that's not where I am. In my work, I'm pro Jesus, pro faith, pro church, pro scripture, but it is our responsibility to read it in a way that gives life, an abundant life, and doesn't take it away from people. And to read it in a way that doesn't cause parents to reject their own children.
Yes, and that in and of itself is kind of a skill, depending upon what your background is and your upbringing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I often have thought that my, as is the case with many people, my upbringing was so eh, religion, my involvement in church was so ubiquitous with my life
Yeah.
that um, it was almost difficult to have to give it much scrutiny because it was always there, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
short of something outside influencing me and compelling me to to reevaluate it, such as a daughter coming out,
Yeah.
um, you know, I, there's not really a reason always to go do that unless
Yeah.
that's just something you commit yourself to. And it's interesting because I did consider the fact that, vocationally and given, your background, and I, I specifically wondered whether there was a difference for you in going back and revising perspective and belief and interpretation of this topic versus the others. So uh, I
I'm
appreciate
not,
your account of that.
yeah. Let me work with this idea of that you just described for yourself. I was a born again Southern Baptist convert as a 16-year-old. I know that world well. I know what they try to do. I walked into a church cold, and they had me praying the sinner's prayer 4 days later, and I became a baptized born again Southern Baptist. And I know that at its best, that was a totalistic kind of culture that attempted to teach a wholehearted 100% sold out commitment to Christ. Every aspect of my life, every day of the week, right? That's what we were taught.
Yeah, I
And
carried my Bible down the halls of my high school.
and you go to church all the time because you're trying to learn
Yeah.
how to do that better. And you're trying to convert everybody you know, right? Because
Mhm.
I did that in high school. Boy, that was not very successful.
If only they knew. If only they knew the truth. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Right. And the the positive side of this is, in a world in which many, many people have no idea what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad, what is true and what is false, what to live for, what's worth dying for, a world full of people drifting, including young men. We have a young men problem right now, drifting without purpose or meaning or truth. The church, that evangelical church, was trying to shape people who knew those answers and who therefore could be purposeful and loving and happy and moral
Mm.
and evangelistic and a good witness, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
I think people don't do well if they don't have a reason for living, a sense of purpose, and some idea of what is true and what is right. Okay, so here's the downside. Every human enterprise, including the enterprise of the church, is potentially fallible. It is fallible. It What it puts in its package of non-negotiables may include some things that need to be reconsidered. But you don't know that until something emerges, like your daughter.
Yeah.
And but then usually the custodians of the tradition, the pastors and the scholars and stuff, will say, "Oh, no, 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 Jeff. You can't rethink this piece without being unfaithful to the whole system, the whole culture we gave you."
Hmm.
And often the way that's enforced is, if you raise questions about this, you're out.
Yeah.
You're out of the church, you're out of your friendship group, and there's no place for you. And so, but what has happened is that in the last 15 years or so, and millions of evangelical Christians, formerly evangelical Christians from here and around the world, have realized that the anti-LGBTQ plus part of it wasn't was a debatable part of the tradition. In
Yeah.
fact, it was a harmful part of the tradition that needed to be reconsidered. I still have the residue of what I was taught as a 16-year-old. My life is for Jesus, and I'm trying to live 100% 24/7 for him.
Hmm.
But I now understand that part of that in my vocation, especially as a professor, writer, teacher, is to help people rethink the package of beliefs and behaviors that goes with that.
That gives me hope and encouragement because again, I'm still in this process, I liken it. I've said it before. I liken it to this caused me to sort of just wipe everything off the table.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the LGBTQ issue. There were several things that kind of culminated in our family at a time at this time and or at that time, and it was a perfect circle of just sort of reconsidering everything. But
Yeah.
um, found myself one day feeling like everything kind of tasted the same. It was very difficult to separate theology from politics, from family,
Yeah.
from lived experience, from
Um,
just all the things you know well.
yeah.
So when you look back at the turning points in your own renovation process, as I call it, you know, you've said it was an abstract theology that shifted you, but the people you loved,
Mm-hmm.
you know, a close family member, members of your congregation,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you talk about this at length in your book, Changing Our Mind. You know, why is it that it kind of takes something so lived and real in front of us to actually wake us up from kind of this more abstract,
Yeah.
you know, way of thinking about life that sometimes may never actually challenge us or come into play?
I call it transformative encounters. Transformative encounters with people. And when you actually look at the Bible with this lens, it's transformative encounters with God through people. Transformative encounters with Jesus through people, with God's Spirit through people. Um, we are designed by God as relational creatures. Um, I think the neuroscientists would tell us that our relationality and our emotions are actually more primal than our cognition. That's kind of the tip of the brain, the relatively late arrival compared to our our deep primal need for belonging and love, and our emotional connections to other human beings.
Mm.
If we don't have those, if we don't have those, and all we have is our cognition, our brain stuff, we're something more like a computer and less like a human. Unfortunately, some versions of Christianity actively try to teach people to not let their emotions or their relationships affect them, um, if it involves challenging the doctrine that that church is teaching. And so one of the biggest criticisms my book got was that I was upfront about the role of my sister
Mm-hmm.
in changing my mind, the role of church members, and especially their stories of being rejected because they were gay,
Mm-hmm.
um, and my students, and the people that I met along the way. I think I tell the story in the book about the Jewish man who came to see me, who told me that he was Orthodox Jewish raised, and that when he had the same problem, it was the same system basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
A totalistic system that put it all put everything on the load bearing wall, and part of it was you can't be gay, and he was gay. So he told me that when he had a deal with God, if you don't change me by the time I'm 18, I'm going to kill myself on my 18th birthday, and he almost did.
Mm-hmm.
And then he turned away from that and said, there's got to be something I'm not understanding here. There's got to be a better way. And he became a real advocate for change. He came to see me to tell me that story. And yeah, it was even before I had changed my mind. He said, I want to tell you my story.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
He knew my work, some of my other work. He said, I think I need to tell you something. I'll never forget it. So I would be not who my mother and father raised me to be if I was unable to respond to something like that, to a person.
Right.
I was raised to love people. I was raised with a really empathetic mother, especially, who wept when I wept.
Mm.
And to those who say empathy is toxic, I say empathy is mother's milk. Empathy is what makes life worth living. Empathy connects us to other people. Um, and so yes, I've met exactly one person in my entire life since writing Changing Our Mind 11 years ago who told me
Mm.
that they changed their mind cognitively only without meeting somebody. And then I've met 10 million people who told me the opposite, that they had to know somebody, it had to be an experience, had to be a person. Yeah.
And I think that's an important consideration. You know,
Yeah.
I've first of all, the term is awesome because it was one of the first bits of language that I felt like I had,
Mm,
you know, coupled with your background, coupled with your, you know, your previous work versus, you know, your more recent work, that transition that I was able to see in you,
mm,
um, was instrumental for my wife and me. And the term transformative encounter, I think, is There's no better way to put it. And that book gave me language to be able to say, hey, this is an important component of that. And the idea that somehow our convictions um, have supremely been prioritized with very little exception over compassion these days in
Mhm,
certain circles
mhm.
of the church. And you mentioned empathy, which seems to be under such heavy attack now. It's like, this is part of our gifts. This is empathy and our senses and our emotions. I mean, those have been so vilified. It stupefies me that it's being suggested in certain circles that we disconnect from that aspect of our humanity.
I think that I heard a hint from something you said earlier that there was a time where kind of everything was being up for grabs at the same time, including politics and family and so on. Um, what I hear you saying is, at least I'll put my spin on it. Something has happened in conservative America, part of conservative America, um, that itself feels pretty toxic to me. Um, uh, a majoring on combat and on battling the enemy, uh, a, a coarsening of language against people we disagree with or don't like or wish weren't here, and uh, a kind of a belligerence. And if we were raised as similarly as I think we were, there's nothing godly or Christian about that.
Yeah, exactly.
And so part of the deconstruction is when you realize, well, it isn't just that I disagree with these people about how to relate to my daughter. Something else is going wrong here that strikes me. And I've people said this to me 100 times. I don't think I'm the one who's changing. I think they're changing. They're becoming mean, hard, uncompassionate.
I've caught a hint of that. Yeah, I've that's crossed my mind before.
Yeah. And so part of what my book did for people, I think, was it gave them some language to rethink, but it also gave them, like you said, I didn't know this was gonna go this way, but kind of like a model for how to navigate the change process. Like, because what I did in the book, I wrote it week by week originally as a series of articles,
Right.
and then it coalesced rather quickly and became a book. I was thinking out loud with high stakes on a weekly basis and changing as I was thinking.
Wow. So it's like a real time account.
It was a
Yeah.
real time
Yeah.
account. Yeah.
Hmm.
And people were like, "Oh, well, okay. It really might be okay to change my mind."
Yeah.
And
Well, that's what it
and
did for me for sure.
in fact, it really might be imperative to change my mind.
Well, and so Sarah Cunningham from Free Mom Hugs is
Yeah.
a previous guest, and
Yeah.
she makes the. I think I even used this clip in the trailer for the podcast that you'll find a way to love and accept your child, or you'll find a way to live without them. And
Yeah. Yeah.
that's a compelling statement. That's a compelling reality that I don't think many people realize. That's how high the stakes are.
It's true. Along the way, after I wrote my book, I ended up on kind of a impromptu lecture circuit,
Mm.
and I met people who had lost their children, either to suicide or to drugs or to such complete alienation that their children would not relate to them at all. And
Yeah.
like, you're dead to me, mom, dad, or the parents saying that to the kids. So the stakes are as high as it gets in human life. And then I had this intuition: any version of Christianity that causes parents and children to live in permanent alienation from each other can't be right. Any version of Christianity that causes kids to want to kill themselves after they have a heartfelt talk with their parents can't be right.
Hmm.
Something's wrong here. By the way, this is one part of deconstruction that I think is really, really important. It's to recognize that Christianity has always been disputed, debated, argued about, and that whatever account you're getting of Christianity from the pulpit of your local church is somebody's account of Christianity. It's not the account of Christianity. It's a version of Christianity. Um, and um, and there are other versions.
Well, and it's tempting to just kind of not hand over agency of your beliefs to the person you trust at the pulpit.
Yep, yep.
Um,
It's easier because then they went to school. They have they have the authority, and it's easier. It's easier not to challenge them for sure. But we are responsible, and you realize that when you're a parent of a child in need. Wow, I can't outsource this. I have
Yeah.
to do the work. Yeah.
That was a reality that smacked us in the face. I mean, you mentioned kind of the primal aspect of it, and where emotions and intuition and all that kind of come into play. It's so my wife is by vocation is a physician associate, physician, a PA, as many people refer to them, and
Yeah.
she's been family practice for since she graduated, and through what we experienced on this topic and living out some of the statistics that we all know too well,
Yeah.
with our daughter, that compelled my wife to divert her specialty to psychiatry. And so, the mental health aspects of this, um, the harm and kind of the processing that sort of becomes necessary to really rectify and reconcile beliefs and teachings versus lived experience, and how do we
Yeah.
how do we bridge this gap here in ways that doesn't cause more harm,
Yep.
either to my faith or to my daughter. Those are things that we wrestled with in real ways. And I don't know that enough people are taking the time to stop and think about what their views and what their words and their positions can do to other people.
Well, um, you don't, again, regular, ordinary lay people don't have any idea what is being reinforced until it comes home with the child sitting on the couch saying, I got something I need to tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but pastors, it's malpractice for them not to know. They
Mhm.
know. They must know by now. There's also an interesting. Okay, I believe this. I believe that exclusionary and hateful teaching about LGBTQ plus people has always been harmful, but it's harmful in a kind of a different way, in a context in which most parts of the society have moved to acceptance. Not everybody, but it's a majority, right?
Mhm.
Um, if the church is the last sector to change and the last sector to really attend to the mental health consequences of its teaching, then you might say the church becomes the most destructive social institution in the society. And when it comes to the mental health of LGBTQ people and their parents and
Mhm.
their relationships, and then they can often confuse that with faithfulness.
Yeah. Yeah. And to fail at acknowledging, much less addressing it, is tragic. I had it here in my notes here. You say the church doesn't have a PR problem; it has a human suffering problem.
Yeah, yeah, that was a
That
good
really
one.
resonated with me.
Yeah, yeah. That was early
Yeah.
in the book. It's a human suffering problem. We are
Yeah.
causing human suffering. And here's something that has to be deconstructed. I remember when I first joined the church, born again, I thought being Christian was the church was always good. The church was always on the good side, right? They're the
Mhm.
good guys, right? They're the guys in the white hats, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But when the church has a human suffering problem that it's inflicting, then you go back and study some history and you realize, oh, this is not the first time.
Right.
So part of the necessary deconstruction is a deconstruction of our sense of the innocence of the church.
Mhm.
The church has often been guilty of doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
And I remember when my book came out, somebody said, so a very highly placed person said, if Gushee is right, that means the Christian church has been wrong about this issue for 2,000 years. I cannot accept that the Christian church could be wrong about an issue for 2,000 years. And
And
then
so that solves it. That
that's
settles it
it.
for that person.
That settles it, right?
Huh.
But the easy response to that is, okay, how about slavery? How about the Crusades? How about supporting the conquest of indigenous people and their destruction?
Mhm.
How
Well,
about
even
you know?
your ending the teaching of contempt speech, that
Yeah,
was a
yeah.
fantastic. That was actually my first discovery of you.
Oh, did you see that on video?
I did actually, and it's part of the origin story of this podcast because 7 years ago, I was in some dark days about this, and I searched for podcasts for Christian parents of LGBTQ plus kids, and at the
All
time,
right.
nothing came up. But I found an episode of a podcast where you were the guest, kind of talking on this topic, which led me to your Reformation project
Huh?
video, which incidentally at the time I didn't realize it was Matthew Vines introducing you. It wasn't until later I went back to watch it again after having kind of read through Matthew Vines. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was Matthew Vines that just introduced him. So
Uh-huh.
I kind of,
Yeah.
you guys for me run in sort of parallel lanes
Hmm.
of having impact on me through this. Um, Yeah. So watching that video, and I don't want to, you have a very particular way you present that case, and I don't want to spoil it because I'm going to
Mm.
share that video to
Oh,
with the
good.
information of this but
Nice.
it is, I don't think I've shared a video more than that video. I have had a number of friends who've, fortunately have stepped up and said, hey, tell me kind of what I need to be understanding better.
Mm.
And I'm like, watch this video, this right here. If this doesn't move the needle for you, I'm not sure anything's going to.
Hmm. I'll never forget that night. I had just completed the first edition of the book. I think it had just come out. Yes, it had just come out. And Matthew invited me to his Reformation Project event in Washington. There is an old church in DC downtown, and there were about 300, 350, almost entirely LGBTQ people, Christians, ex-Christians. And I gave that speech, and it was one of the most electric moments of my life. And I remember afterwards, I did a book signing, and pretty much everybody in that auditorium came and wanted to meet me
Hmm.
and tell me their story and cry and hug and everything like that has happened since I wrote the book has, to me, been confirmation of the tremendous need for change here and the pent up hurt. Let me also say this: the church has driven away scads of people with its teaching. And so part of the great value of a ministry like Matthew Vines is he's pulling the brokenhearted children of God back
Hmm.
into the church because they realize it isn't the church that is against us, it's this version of church, but there are other versions of church that will welcome us with open arms.
Yeah.
And so when I've been in worship spaces with predominantly LGBTQ Christians, the hunger and the passion and the hurt and the gratitude and the relief and the pain, it's all in there. The intensity of that kind of worship experience is unlike any other spaces that I'm ever in.
I don't remember the exact quote, but I think I remember you saying something in the book about Jesus is probably more present among those people
Yes.
than, yeah.
1,000 days, or what is it? One day in the presence of the bullied and mistreated. Yeah, better than 1,000 days in the presence of those who do the harm.
Yes.
And it's true. My loyalty shifted. Loyalty is a very powerful word here. Let's name it for a second. You are loyal to your child. If a parent is not loyal to a child, I don't know what kind of parent they are, but you are
Hmm.
loyal to your child. Your loyalty to your child means you have an obligation that you feel to the core of your being to be the best father you can be to her. And that's totally right. And that means you're going to do this work so that you can be a good father to her.
Yeah.
And that is what people are doing all over the country and all over the world, unless they have church leaders telling them that's the wrong thing to do and they listen. Unless those people, their leaders tell them, if you do this, if you, I've had many people tell me that their pastor said, if you accept your daughter and don't kick her out, you cannot be a member of our church anymore. I mean, what is that?
Yeah. Show me the door.
Uh huh.
Show me where to
Yep.
go.
Yep.
This is a great paragraph. It is increasingly agreed, even on the Christian traditionalist side, gay people exist. It is wrong to call them names or use slurs about them. Their relationships should not be criminalized. They should not be discriminated against in employment, housing, or public accommodations. They should not be bullied. They should never have to be afraid of violence as they go about their daily lives. They should not be blamed for America's security problems or social ills. They should not be stigmatized or treated with contempt. You go on to say there should be no space in church life or culture for dehumanization and mistreatment. Any Christian reader anywhere in the world, regardless of views on sexual ethics, ought to be able to agree with this paragraph. It's mind-boggling to me that there are those who adamantly would oppose that paragraph and call themselves Christ followers.
Yeah, it's true. What I was trying to do in the book, you remember, is to kind of establish a baseline,
Hmm.
in the beginning and say, can we agree on this? Okay, good. Next
Hmm.
chapter. Can we agree on this? Good. Next chapter. And then remember, I have the expression, if this is where you get off the bus, well, you've made some progress. Remember that?
Yeah, right. I was like, wait,
Uh,
there's half the book left here. What do you mean get off the bus? There's more work to be done here.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
For some people at that moment, that was as far as they were willing to go. I've actually had people tell me that in 2014 they couldn't hear the book, but now they can, so they're picking it up again. So, um, so, that baseline should be non-negotiable, and but again, that's because there are norms
Hmm.
um, of love, justice, passion, dignity, mercy, and part of what I argue in the book is those norms always apply: love, justice, compassion, dignity, mercy. Um, if we fall below that, we're falling below the baseline.
Hmm.
Doesn't matter how we interpret 6 verses. It's those norms are non-negotiable for me as a Christian ethicist. That's pretty obvious. But people were Christians have often fallen well below those norms because they believe that they are authorized scripturally to do so. And I think that's a disaster. It needs to be called out.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to say, kind of back to your book and Matthew Vine's book, there's in the content that in the approach that I take in sort of messaging through the podcast and through the writings that go with it, um, I've kind of sorted out ways people process through this. For me, I was very identity sensitive. What does this mean for me, my reputation?
Mm-hmm.
Um, what are my friends going to think about the fact that I have a daughter, who's LGBTQ plus? What are they going to just assume about our house and what does or doesn't go on there or what's not being taught properly there? Those are all questions, that went through my mind. Other people process it, with other priorities. It could be scripture and theology. It could be, well, I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with religion, but traditionally this just seems wrong. So there's a lot of there's a kind of a rational approach to this as well. And what I loved about your book in particular is that I feel like, kind of spanned the gamut, if you will. You hit from all those different angles because you have the theology background and the ministry background and all that goes into that, which is very academic and in some way at least can be perceived as this is rock solid knowledge. But then here you have a sister, some members of your congregation that are starting to show you some different perspectives and different life experiences. Um, for those, and on the Matthew Vine approach, for those who really need that kind of deep dive into the scripture aspect of it, commonly referred to as, the clobber passages, and then he gets into other things too. That's a really solid book, I think, for someone who's stuck in this sort of theological, just staring at this load-bearing wall in front of me and not quite knowing how to get around it or get through it or where I can
Right.
make an opening and be safe about it.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated how you were able to take the approach from different angles. And I think the key one was that transformative experience. I mean, because it's probably what instigated you to dive into such a project. I mean, and that came at a tremendous personal cost to you. I mean, I'm just assuming that, and I've heard you refer to it, but no one will ever know that impact other than you. But here I was, identity sensitive about my daughter. Here you are, kind of tossing a match on potentially on portions of the old career,
Yeah.
with this release.
Um, I I would say, well, thanks for the praise of the approach of the book. I do think um, personality has something to do with it. I you know, I'm a person who is empathetic and whose emotions are pretty present to me, and I know all of that matters in human life and relationships matter, and that it isn't just arguments about Leviticus or Romans 1. It just isn't. There's more going on than that. Uh, the cost was real, but it didn't take long for me to see people who had borne a much more serious cost. There's a great word, solidarity, which means essentially in ethics, it means entering into the suffering of another group and taking it on uh, as your suffering, right? So, like, um, I entered into solidarity with LGBTQ plus people, and as I did, they trusted me with their stories more and more. And the more I heard these horrifying stories, the more I felt a sense of solidarity. And so my suffering was a drop in the bucket compared to people kicked out of their churches, disowned by their parents, subjects of physical violence, being stripped of their ministries. Um, you know, I was invited to speak in San Francisco right after the Obergefell gay marriage decision was approved. And I was at a Episcopal cathedral there, and the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus sang that night. And I met them afterwards, and probably half of them were former evangelical musicians
Hmm.
who, when they came out, they lost their worlds, they lost their families, they lost their churches, they lost their ministries, they lost their jobs, um, and they were finding community with these other fellow exiles. So part of a really, I think, constructive deconstruction for me is I was used to being comfortably welcomed as evangelical leader type in a lot of
Hmm.
spaces, and there was a lot of honor associated with that. And when I was dishonored, I joined a lot of other people who had experienced dishonor. And I think then when I went back to Jesus and the Gospels, Jesus was dishonored a lot and was treated as dishonorable because of the people he hung out with, lepers and zealots and tax collectors and bleeding women and stuff like that. So part of what I realized is that this was extremely good for me spiritually and extremely good for my understanding of Jesus because I mean Jesus was crucified, humiliated, tortured, rejected as the culmination of a career of standing with those on the margins. So I never lost my job and I didn't lose my church. I did lose friends. I lost speaking opportunities. I lost
Hmm.
honor. I was dishonored a lot. And that gets to what you said about identity. Part of what came to your mind, I'm glad you're honest about it and you said it, you risked being dishonored when it became known that you had an LGBTQ plus daughter and that you were going to support her, that whole thing risked your honor as a man, as a Christian, as a dad, as a family. What did he do wrong? What didn't he teach right? Of course, we know that that's none of it is that's just not it at all. That's not what happens, right?
Sure.
But part of why this is hard for families is because it isn't just about what's going to happen to their child, it's what's going to happen to them.
Yeah, exactly.
uh, their friends may say, "Ew, what's wrong with you?" They may be treated like lepers or like somebody having done something wrong.
Hmm.
Um, but what I do say to parents is, own that fear and recognize that that fear is felt all the more abundantly by your own child.
That's a great reminder. It's true. It is. And, I've I've referred to what you're talking about. Um, and I'll use this kind of as a transition to talk specifically more about kind of church. But
Yeah,
my wife and I were a part of what is one of the largest churches in America. We were a part of it before it grew into that, and so being a part of its early days, we were married by the pastor there, called him a personal friend.
mm,
Um, Spent some time in various service and leadership roles there. Uh, but what there's a number of different angles I could go here. What I think we felt the most was like what felt like having a backstage pass for so many years
yeah,
into a lot of that ministry.
yeah,
Suddenly felt like we had just been demoted to maybe general admission. Um, and that's jarring. It's certainly when your social circles. In the case of my wife and my daughters at the time, the homeschooling, the part of the
yeah,
community we were in, which were all mostly members of that church as well. It's just it's a very disoriented situation to be in because maybe you're trying to keep this under wraps until where this is going to shake out. Maybe there's some shame and embarrassment in it.
yeah,
But
yeah,
it's a very real factor whether people are proactively kind of heaping it on you or not, right?
yeah.
Um,
There's the fear of it. Yeah,
for sure, for sure. So here's a quote that I kind of wanted to move towards the church thing. And by the way, for those in the audience listening, there is so much more to Dr. Gushee's like personal story. I would love to have time to dive into, but I'm going to save that for their opportunity to go read it in your book.
okay.
Because I think there are some really important questions I want to ask you that you're uniquely equipped to really speak towards. But you have a statement that says there becomes a moment when avoidism cannot be sustained due to Christian missional, vocational, and leadership responsibilities. That's in reference to um, kind of that moment where maybe a church leadership realizes it's do or die time. We need to step
Hmm.
into this. Or
Yeah,
I've written a lot of, from my perspective, I kind of call this silence. Our experience with this was that with the church we came from, it was known among certain circles that divisive topics were not going to be a part of what was taught there, for fear of what it may risk and, the kind of controversy it may cause. But um, I feel like, man, we're at a time where some of these things, it says something to be silent about it.
right. Yeah,
Um, I, and I think that dovetails with what you're saying. It's So what we woke up one day and we're just like, we are at a crossroads. We are very embedded and involved and attend a place in a community where our daughter, whether it's overtly said or not, in theory has to check something at the door before she can enter. And there's a dissonance as a parent that we could not accept. And so we chose to leave, and we chose quietly. We just left quietly, despite our friendships and circles and involvement with, many of the people very, very involved at that church. I'm curious. I actually almost reached out to you at that time because I wanted to know your advice on, for someone in that situation, what is a graceful but impactful way to leave? Because I felt like maybe I might have been uniquely positioned to at least make a thoughtful plea or statement about this topic to the right people. I just didn't know how to make it or
Mm.
whether it was appropriate.
Um, there's a lot of options. Well, I'm usually asked, when do you know when it's time to leave? Right.
Hmm.
Um, and if it's time to leave, or do you stay? Um, you must have concluded together that it was not tenable to stay, wasn't good for you and your family, for your daughter.
Right.
Um, One could ask for a meeting with the elders or with the pastor and say, let me tell you why we feel the need to leave. One could write a letter. One could make a social media post with a letter, a thoughtful letter saying, here's why we're leaving this church.
Yeah. Like an open letter kind of
An
situation.
open letter. Yeah. One could ask for a private meeting with the elders and say, your avoidism, your desire to avoid talking about this, you have your reasons for that. But here's my story. Here's our story. Here's why that was not enough for us. Why we needed more than that. We needed better than that.
Yeah.
Um, and there comes a time where not speaking is speaking very loudly.
That was kind of where we came out on this.
Yeah.
Um, taking it back to kind of the job site, so to speak, it's one of the things I was very committed to in design and construction was getting as much information and like reliable information into the blueprints as possible, like
Mm,
the literal blueprints, right?
mm-hmm,
Because you want to see chaos erupt both on the job and in your budget. Don't give any details. See what kind of assumptions are made and see what kind of what kind of outcome you end up with when it's not clear what's in these plans.
mm-hmm,
And for us, we just came to a point where we needed clarity more than we used to because of the implications of whether it's complacency and not making a change, or, I mean, we needed to show, not that our daughter was sitting here demanding of us to do something, but we were compelled to make sure that we were taking our daughter into account and showing her what support looks like.
mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
support is to disconnect from the things that either are harming or are based on lack of clarity, causing implied harm. Um,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of where we were at. Um,
Yeah. Did you leave the homeschool world as well? Yeah. Yeah. So did she end up going to a public school or some different kind of school?
she ended up going to a private school that was Christian, but that we pleasantly were surprised by the number of allies that found their way to us to let us know they
Okay.
were allies.
Good. Yeah.
Um,
There's
and
a lot of grief and a lot of loss in this process, right? I mean,
right.
a lot left behind. Um, but if your loyalty is not to your reputation or not to your comfort, but to your child, then you bear the loss, and you do that, and you do it as a family.
So in your book, you are essentially making the case that I don't know. In a way, the title sort of speaks towards, I think, ministry leadership. Although everyone under that leadership is also a viable part of your audience and your readership of the book. Um, I'm curious though, like when you were writing that, how much of church leadership was in your mind versus guys like me?
Um, I was saying the reason I called it, and people never can remember the title, I called it "Changing Our Mind" instead of "Minds," is because I was convinced that this was a kind of moment where the collective mind of the church needed to change.
Church, capital C, as we called it.
Capital
Yeah.
C.
Hmm.
The capital C church needs to change its mind. And so that was everybody, but there are strategically positioned leaders in any organization. And so I was thinking of seminary professors and parachurch leaders like campus ministries, and of course thousands and thousands of pastors and youth pastors and things like that.
Mhm.
But I would say, while I did hear from lots and lots of those, I learned through the process that it's a million individuals changing their minds. It's you in your house.
Mhm.
It's that person over there in their house, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and the collective mind change that happens at the grassroots level, at the house by house level, is also how things change. And that has happened to a considerable extent.
Mhm.
Um, but wouldn't it be nice, like just as an example, in that anti-Semitism, the Reformation Project speech, um, on the whole, the church after the Holocaust changed its mind about its teaching about the Jewish people. The church changed its mind and started teaching something different. What I was dreaming of was with the church changing its mind that decisively, collectively. Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, every kind of Protestant denomination, pastors, seminary professors, let's change our mind together and stop hurting people. Let's get this right now. And it didn't happen as quickly as that, though a lot of minds have been changed for
Sure.
sure.
So I think you said earlier, was it 11 years ago that
Yeah.
the original edition came out?
Yeah.
So talk about kind of some of the victories that you've been privy to.
Um, the United Methodist Church as a denomination decided to be inclusive after 40 years of arguing about it. Um, a post evangelical movement has been born with a non negotiable commitment to inclusion. And I'm in the middle of that. Um, the Baptists who came out of the Southern Baptist Convention, the moderate Baptists and the progressive Baptists,
Mhm.
they're all in pretty much. The progressive Baptists for sure, but pretty much my seminary where I teach here in Atlanta, it's inclusive. Most seminaries are now on the progressive side. Um, I've been I've been all over the world. I've seen churches shift from evangelical to post evangelical or non inclusive to inclusive. Sometimes because a leader took them through the process, and I've helped the leader do that.
Mhm.
Um, uh, but to me, probably the most important victories go like this. Somebody sends me an email, or when I was on social media, I got off recently, but send me a direct message and say, Jill, I'm 19 years old. I'm thinking of killing myself. Can you help me understand a path forward for me? And here's my story. And I would try to get them some help and also try to give them some comfort and encouragement. People have told me that they're quite convinced that the book saved lives.
Mhm. I
That's the
believe
big
that.
that's the biggest victory that there could possibly be.
Well, I mean, we may be an example of that. I mean, your book dramatically changed my wife's and my perspectives and our approach to
Right.
this, which had massive impact on our daughter's wellness.
I'm
Not to
really glad
mention,
to hear that. Really
yeah,
glad to hear that.
not to mention all the other people in our lives that we see differently now,
Yeah.
or all the people in our lives that have entered our lives because of our openness and willingness on this topic.
Yeah.
Right. I had
Yeah.
coffee yesterday. I got connected to a guy from a friend. He's like, I have the perfect guy you need to talk to. He was telling this friend. This guy had it was in a very similar situation to us, and so we went to coffee, and he wanted to know like you know what are ways that I can support my 17-year-old daughter who just gave me this news. He was in a fantastic position. I was like, dude, you've done everything. Like I would, if I gave you a checklist, you've done them all as far as the dad's concerned, right?
Mm.
And so he just wanted to know, hey man, how can I even do this better? And I'm like, dude, this is great, man.
That's great.
You've got this teed up so nicely, and that girl is gonna, yeah, and her struggle, the struggle for them was really within the daughter. She had grown up in a Christian school, and kept hearing the voices of the teachings,
Yeah.
that she had been subject to, and so um,
Yeah. Yes,
that's
you enter a new world. You lose a world and you gain a world. I'm sure
sure,
you lost friends.
yeah,
I'm sure you did. But you've gained friends. And I remember there's a story that I like that's always in my mind. I was invited to Michigan to address a big church that was having the debate.
hmm
And so there I was with all the pastors and the elders and the scholars in a big room full of skeptical and interested people, right? Okay, hundreds of people happens all the time. But before that, somebody had smart idea of having me sit in a church parlor with the LGBT young people in that church.
Hmm.
And it was me and some parents and mainly teenagers. And they said, "We just want you to meet our kids and talk with them, then have them know you." And you're going to have a higher percentage of piercings and tattoos and blue
Right.
hair
Yeah.
and right,
The
you
hair.
know, because they're teenagers and also they're dealing with being different, right?
Yeah. Sure.
And so there they all were, just hanging out, looking like slovenly teenagers, the way teenagers so often do,
Mhm.
and it was a delight. And I have often said I would much prefer to be in those rooms than in the rooms with the skeptical adults who want to have theological arguments with me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's
your loyalty changes, who you care about changes,
it does.
who you want to take care of changes, right?
Hmm.
And I'm
If
yeah,
an
yeah,
interesting outpouring of that for me is like
yeah,
just out in public. It's like I wouldn't consider myself terribly conversational, but like where we are, the part of the country we're in, it's like people are known to be friendly. So it's like if you're in
yeah,
line waiting on something at the grocery store, you're probably going to talk to the person in front of you, right?
yeah.
But for me, I have sort of just taken the challenge and the charge of I'm going to find the least likely person in this room who's going to have somebody come up to him, and I'm going to
Mm,
be that guy that goes up to him.
that's great.
You
Yeah,
know, and it's usually the LGBTQ plus person. You know, in the at least here in Oklahoma City, that's if you're vastly different, odds are that's probably why you're different. You
mm,
know, because otherwise, kind of a homogenous. At least
yeah.
my growing up here kind of leads me to believe it was homogenous. But if you have a few more minutes, I want to wrap up with a few other thoughts and questions. So your book, Kingdom Ethics, was profoundly influential um, over the past several decades in kind of providing some foundational support to a lot of um, the evangelical positions. Some of those have kind of taken more into political. Like I said, the soup. I mean, you can't. They all taste the
Right.
same. Um, I you didn't necessarily take. I think if I remember right, kind of the characterization I recall concluding was the LGBTQ topic in your previous work wasn't really central. It was
Never.
just kind of, okay, it's got to be on the menu. So among these other very ethical things that I'm, waxing on and providing influence of, this is just kind of part of the standard issue
Yeah.
position for the evangelical church. So it's not like you're necessarily wrestling with your past self on this. At least to the extent that I feel I was. But I am curious, like, what does David Gushee going through this process look like from a standpoint of personal grace and
Mm,
looking
mm.
back on who you used to be versus who you are today?
I would say that I always rejected the demagoguing LGBT issues, the lifting up LGBTQ people as the great enemy or whatever. I was always against that.
Mhm.
But when I wrote Kingdom Ethics with my teacher Glenn Stassen in the late '90s, I would just say he said he did not want to deal with sexual ethics issues. He wanted me to deal with them. So I wrote the chapter. I had some pretty clear ideas about sexual ethics as a whole, which I still hold to. And they're actually in the book. They're in Changing Our Mind. You
Mhm.
know, um, but I just basically did, you might call it standard equipment, standard, you know, uh, issue evangelical on LGBT. I just right, and I feel bad about that. But again, it was a relationship that helped. I remember getting a letter um, from a former student of mine who said, "I loved your teaching. You were great to me and all your students. I loved your teaching except for one issue because I was gay and I was closeted in your classroom as I was in my Baptist university.
Mhm.
And you didn't know that you were doing harm, but you were." I later saw that young man up in Boston and we talked it all out. So when I think that for 14 years, I taught Christian ethics at two schools, and one day I did the standard issue stuff on LGBTQ issues, I feel bad about every one of those class sessions now.
Mhm.
Um, And the fact that I wasn't hateful isn't good enough. I also wasn't brave. but the only way I exonerate myself, not that I should, is if I had considered changing my mind, I would have immediately lost my job in both of those schools. It just was not even within the realm of the thinkable.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I would say to parents, some good, clean repentance is always called for when we realize we've done wrong.
Hmm.
But wallowing in shame is not constructive.
Well said. I've spent time there.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, my biggest critic is the voice right here.
that's right.
Um, and so it's kind of like looking back at the house that was built 20 years ago and sort of condemning the builder for the materials that were available to him at the time,
Yeah, yep. Uh,
holding him to today's standard. And I have to remind myself of that because even still, I will think, "God, I can't believe I thought that. I can't believe I believe that. I can't
yeah,
believe I was a part of that group who
yeah,
embodies that so publicly and readily." Right.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I
If
had
that
a,
can be if
go
that can
ahead.
be turned into fuel, if
Mhm.
that can be turned into fuel for energy now to do good now,
Which I like
you
that framing. Yes.
use it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. I had it was one project, one of the rare other renovation projects I did. I met with an architect, and he's kind of an old school guy, right? He um, really thinks about the importance of buildings and how they survive and how they stand the test of time, and both aesthetically and functionally. But I had him out to look at a particular project that we were thinking about taking forward, like it was it was a red brick house, great house, but the particular brick had been discontinued. So the renovation we were going to do, the brick wasn't going to match. And
Mm,
so we were talking about just painting all the brick a particular color and kind of moving it forward into more of a modern kind of setting. And he and I are walking around the house literally, and he's like, he goes, I want you to rethink the idea of repainting everything. He goes, It's a good choice, but I think at this point and at this point is where that paint stops and the original brick continues." And I'm like, "Well, why is that? Because I mean, if we're going through the renovation, why not go ahead and bring it all the way forward?" And he goes, "Well, never overlook the importance of allowing the old version of this house to show through so that you can demonstrate how forward you've brought it." And to me, that was, I don't know, it's something that comes to mind here. It's something that drops into my mind when I start to go there about being critical
mm,
of my past self. I'm not sure necessarily what the old me what part of the old me is supposed to still show that's
yeah.
unpainted,
Mm,
but it's still,
mm.
for some reason, it resonates with me on that topic and
Yeah,
rings true.
yeah.
Um,
It's not that helpful to live in shame. In fact, it's not helpful at all. Um, and we've all learned a lot.
yeah,
Things we had to learn some things through people. God had to teach us some things, and we've learned them, and we're still learning them.
yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that, and that's one thing that I think that I'm learning through this podcast is that it is a process. It's not like something that you necessarily arrive at. I mean, there may
Oh,
be milestones where you're like, okay, being accepting of my child is a milestone I want to try to get to, and then being affirming of my child is a milestone I want to
mhm.
get to, because this isn't for everyone an easy switch, right?
No.
So to that, as we wrap this up, kind of to that end, I mean, there's Dr. Gushee, the ethicist, the theologian, the professor, and the minister. But there's Dr. Gushee, the brother and the friend. What is your closing message to anyone who is out there listening or watching this and they're about to embark on a renovation, but they don't necessarily know what that next step looks like? What would your message to them be?
Um, always lean into empathetic love of people.
Mm,
Um, and the let the people who are almost certainly triggering the need for your renovation, the daughter, the son, the trans child, the sister, the parent, whatever, let them be absolutely clear that you are unconditionally loyal and loving to them, and that you're going to go on the journey with them.
mm,
It is a journey. It's a journey with a lot of pain, but a journey with a lot of redemption on the other
yeah,
side as well,
and beauty.
and beauty, absolutely. Um, so when our loved ones know that we are unconditionally loyal to them, there's a great word for that, by the way, in the Hebrew, hesed. It means steadfast love.
Mm,
Steadfast love. I will love you steadfastly. Covenant love. Nothing will break my covenant with my child, with my sister, with my spouse. And if they know that, they can relax a little bit, and you can relax a little bit, and you go on the journey together, a journey in which love is the governing norm, and the ground of the relationship. And you stumble forward together, but you do so in confidence that you have each other, and that I would say that God has you on such a journey, because that's the kind of God we are taught about in the Bible, the God of steadfast covenant love.
Well said. That outcome in and of itself, I think, is like a gold standard finish line to strive for.
It is.
Um,
Yeah.
while accomplishing that, though, the statistics that you change in your child's trajectory from a standpoint of the risks that they carry, if you don't do that, um, they're they are so scary. And I try not to use fear as a motivator anymore. But I for those who kind of seek the rational side of things, like change, to help me change my mind from a standpoint of like, give me all the reasons why I have to do this. That's another one that comes to mind there.
And I cite those numbers too. The Family Acceptance Project out of San
Yes.
Francisco. That's something that is now well known. The more accepting and loving the parent, the better the mental health outcome for the child. The less accepting and loving, the worse the mental health outcome for the child. We in a very large sense, will determine the mental health outcome, especially for our adolescent children when they come out, adolescent or younger. And so, uh, so that is our responsibility to do our part right.
Yeah. So my last thought to wrap up here, over the course of my career, built several hundred homes, and when someone is willing to go get a big loan and a mortgage for hundreds of thousands of dollars and trust you to build something that's going to shelter their family and host them for all of these
Sure.
major times in their lives and whatnot, that's a great compliment. It was something that I took very seriously, but I came to learn that an even greater compliment is when they come back to you when life changes, when situations change, and they ask you to do it again.
Huh.
And you come to mind in that because while your early work, played a role in my understanding of so many things, it's your more recent and later work that has led to a renovation. And in a way, you're kind of like the contractor that I brought back to help me add some space to this blueprint, to make accommodation for what my lived experience and what my life has taught me. And so I just want to make sure I express my gratitude for that.
Thank you so much. That's really meaningful, Jeff. I do think that my career was kind of reborn after 2014 when that book came out, and since then I think I have been a trusted guide for the reconstruction process for a lot of people.
Yeah.
And,
reconstruction is important. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
and
an
I'm doing a lot of
important
that.
distinction. Yes.
And people trust me, and I take that, as you said, as a builder. I mean, obviously, as a Christian leader type, the spiritual responsibility in that role is very high. Please pray for me as I continue to do my work, and that I always be found faithful.
Renovation is messy work, but it's what we do when something matters enough to keep. When love leads, rebuilding isn't failure, it's faithfulness. If this conversation resonated, I'd encourage you to spend more time with the work of Dr. Gushee. His book, Changing Our Mind, has guided countless people through this exact tension. His upcoming book, Job in Exile, A Guide for Spiritual Refugees, is due in fall of 26. It speaks directly to those navigating faith after displacement. You'll find links to all of it in the show notes for this episode at lovewoa.com. If this episode was meaningful, please like it, leave a review, and share it with someone who might need it. And if you want to reach me directly, I'd love to hear from you. My email is always open at jeff@lovewoa.com. You can also check out Metamorphosis, my guided email journey for anyone learning how to love without asterisks. Short, thoughtful, and designed to meet you where you are. Check out more at lovewoa.com. Thanks for being here and for staying in the work here on Love Without Asterisks. I'm Jeff Click, holding on to the truth that the greatest of these is love.